All right. So as Donna said, we are Jen and Chris from the Maryland and New York Deafblind Projects. And we created a document that you will see here, which is the augmentative and alternative communication system blended with the cortical visual impairment CVI range. We've created this matrix and we're gonna kind of go through it with you guys and talk a little bit about the stuff that we've included, the strategies for communication and vision access. Today is going to be primarily me, and so a little bit more heavy on the communication side of things. And then on Thursdays, Chris is going to get a little deeper into some more of the higher level vision related stuff. So stick with us and feel free to put questions at any time in the chat box. And my hope is that we can make this a little bit interactive through the chat box as much as possible, but we've got a lot of information to cover, so let's get to it. So just a basic overview of what we're going to cover today. Like I said, a little bit more on the communication modes today, and then a little bit more on vision as we get closer to Thursday. So why did we create what we did? Why did we create this matrix that we made? Primarily because we were seeing mismatches in communication systems that were set up for students. So something might be accessible for them based on their communication level, but might be visually inaccessible for their CVI level. Or it might be a system that's created that really matches the needs for their CVI, but isn't necessarily matching the child's needs for their expressive communication abilities. And so our goal was to kind of create a matrix or something that the team could utilize to come together as a team. The vision professionals, the speech and language professionals, the teacher of the deaf, the TBI, as a team to develop a system that's going to meet all of these areas of needs for a student. And you'll see some examples at the bottom, like, an example might be for a student who's in phase 1 using an eye gaze system that might not be visually accessible for them. Or a student who is in phase 3 using a complex iPad system, which visually might be accessible for them, but if they're a pre-symbolic communicator, the icons that might be used on that iPad might not be accessible for them at their expressive communication level. So our goal is to create a balanced communication plan. What does that look like? Something that, again, like we said, matches the child's expressive communication level access. Either they're a pre-symbolic or a symbolic language user, pre-linguistic or linguistic. You'll see those terms kind of used interchangeably, and that matches their sensory access needs. Their CVI phase, the characteristics that they're experiencing, and their preferred learning channels. And so all of these things down the bottom here help kind of build that balance. So first and foremost, know this: all of our students can and are communicating. We must presume competence. That's the foundation of everything. If we go into this thinking that a student is not communicating in any way, shape, or form, right off the bat, you're not going to be successful. Our students are communicating. It's a matter of being on us to determine how and what they're communicating about. Oftentimes, for our children who are very emerging pre-symbolic communicators, it's on the adult, it's on us to interpret the meaning or the intent of that student's behavior. What are they doing and what does it mean? And then to respond to that, to reinforce that and build on that. Oftentimes, we provide and set up the environment for our children to communicate. Their favorite toy or their favorite person needs to be present in front of them for them to ask about. Setting them up in the environment for what they like, what they want. Oftentimes it's on us to kind of establish that moment, to be that active listener and provide those opportunities for our students who want to communicate. So that's really where those likes and dislikes comes into play. Many of our students have processing delays. If you guys are if anybody is interested in another webinar for great information, you might want to check out Maurice Belote from California Deafblind Project does a great presentation on auditory processing disorder and CVI and how those two kind of correlate in regards to the needs for processing visual and auditory information. It is a known fact that us as humans talk faster than many of our children can even physically comprehend. So that's just right off the bat. And then think of all of the other complexities and needs of our students that have CVI, that may have multiple disabilities. Those processing delays are significant, and that can make or break a student's ability not only to receive information, but then to have the opportunity to then respond. And of course, the impact of multisensory complexity on a student can be significant. I'm talking primarily, for some of our deafblind students, the impact of not being able to look and listen at the same time, be able to look at for information through American Sign Language and look at information that's being presented to them at the same time, receiving tactile ASL or touching and exploring objects at the same time that they're receiving visual information. All of that multisensory complexity can be significant. So this is just like a public service announcement for you guys. This is ASHA's definition of AAC, and that includes all forms of communication other than oral speech. So that means American Sign Language, that means gestures, facial expressions, writing, pictures, whatever we're using. So all of this, AAC does not just talking about maybe say like a speech generating device or an SGD to help our interpreters.
Jen, this is Chris. Just let me chime in really quickly to say that that's the ASHA definition, the American Speech and Hearing Association definition
of AAC. Is that not what I said?
No, you did. But
okay.
but just to point out that that's not necessarily everyone's definition of AAC. That in the deaf-blind community, we don't necessarily consider sign language AAC. Right. I mean, and that's sort of debatable. Is sign language an augmentative and alternative form, or is it really just a language as an alternative to speech? So, because I've heard some controversy raised about that particular one.
Thank you. Yes, which is why we kind of put this in there just to correlate both of those points. So I appreciate that. So when we talk about modes of communication, for our students, some of our students may use multiple modes of communication, either simultaneously or at different times for different purposes. So what does that mean? One student may use one form receptively and a different form expressively. Might be throughout the course of the day. You might have a student that uses ASL in the morning, but needs more access to spoken language in the afternoon because of visual fatigue, whatever the course may be. Students might use multiple modes within the same setting. Maybe students are using a few signs as well as a speech generating device. Different modes with different partners. Could be using one modality at school and one modality at home, depending on if the family versus the school are modeling different modes of communication for the students. And like I said, receptive and expressive might be different modalities. So really it's multimodal communication is significant for our students, especially with multiple needs that might need different access to different modalities throughout the day for various reasons. And so when we look at the multiple modes or systems of communication that are available to our students, these are just a couple examples. Aided versus unaided, could be coactive signing, like you'll see in the one picture of an adult helping a student form ASL, no tech versus low technology versus high tech. There's a whole span of different options available. So how do we help our students with deafblindness kind of build this foundation of communication? Really, it starts with shared experiences. Those opportunities to be present and hands-on and an active listener. And we're going to kind of talk about what an active listener means for our deafblind students, using hand-under-hand engagement to be physically present with that student in a tactile manner. So having physical contact with that child, participating in something with them, being that communication partner by experiencing what that student experiences at the same time and in the same physical manner. Providing a robust receptive language model. Really what we are talking about today in regards to our matrix is in relation to expressive language. So we just always want to put out there that we support providing a robust receptive language model to students in an accessible modality. And that could be different depending on the student's needs, and using that multimodal approach, but also, not just modeling for students. We always talk about modeling for students the modality of communication that we are trying to get them to use, be that ASL or, some sort of device, but also modeling what the child's current expressive modality might be. And that might simply be some basic behaviors, some basic gestures, blowing bubbles, or blowing raspberries or something like that. Whatever the child currently does, we also need to model and to participate in how they are communicating at the moment to start that engagement and that understanding for them that we are responding to what they are currently doing. Because that's how we're going to build their desire and ability to respond to what we're doing and what we want them to do. And increase that depth and breadth of how they communicate by responding to what the child is currently doing to communicate an intent, give an intent of a message. So just a reminder that deaf blindness is a disability of access. Why is that? Because 90% of information that we receive is through our distance senses, which is our vision and our hearing. So if a student cannot clearly hear or see what is going on around them, what are some things that they're going to miss out on? Learning from their classmates, especially look at an early childhood classroom where a teacher passes around a material from student to student, where there are center-based activities like a dramatic play center, and kids learn how to develop dress up and dramatic play skills, playing with pretend food and pretend roles of mom and dad, all of that stuff, all of that interactive stuff that students learn incidentally through just being around their peers and their classmates. Knowing who is with them in the classroom, who is there and available for them to even want to communicate with. When people leave or enter or leave, for some students, it might be that complete unawareness of who is there and available to them, or it might be complete chaos of a lot of movement of people and noise, and they're not visually able to discriminate one person from the other, and so not being able to kind of decipher who's there and available to them or what's going on. And missing content information from a lesson that's being taught. If they're getting fragmented pieces of visual or auditory information, how does that impact their ability to understand novel concepts that are trying to be taught? And so this is just another visual example of how vision and hearing loss can impact our students' ability to learn. Look at if a child has typical vision and hearing, so much information is received incidentally and very little through direct instruction. But for children who are deafblind, it is the exact opposite. Another thing to think about, especially, for our students with CDI, if they also have a hearing loss, they might also be learning receptive language at the same time. So for students that have any kind of vision loss, what do? We tend to heavily put emphasis on auditory input, spoken language, providing them with information auditorily, talking them through things, what's happening, what's around them, who we are, what's going on. If our students have a hearing loss, they might still be learning that vocabulary at the same time. So they might be missing understanding of what they are being asked to do. They might not have already the labels for objects or actions or people around them to be able to then utilize that expressively through a tangible symbol or some sort of abstract means at that moment. They might not be, they may be learning just to attend to a visual or a tactile modality of language, just how to receive information in an accessible manner. And core vocabulary that we're going to talk about a little bit later are often very, very abstract terms to our students if they don't already have a language foundation. So just for your guys' knowledge, for our students who are deafblind, the key bridge between all of this educational information and our students with deaf blindness is what we call an intervener. If this is a term that is new to you, I'm hoping it's not, but if this is something that's new to you, the role of an intervener is someone to facilitate that access to everything that's happening around the students, that environmental information, all of that incidental stuff that they're missing. The intervener helps bridge that information and bring it to the student. They facilitate communication, both receptively providing them with a consistent access to receptive communication in an accessible modality, as well as being that constant active listener for that deafblind student to receive the communication that they are giving in whatever manner that they are giving it out, in whatever time that they need to do so. They develop and maintain that trusting, interactive relationship with the student so that student knows, hey, you get me, and so I'm going to want to engage with you. I'm going to want to try and communicate with you because we have this back and forth, this ability to understand each other, even if it's not in a typical formal traditional means. And they typically have specialized training and skills in deafblindness, which is something that our deafblind projects can help fund and support people in getting if anyone knows of someone who is interested in becoming an intervener. And it helps, as you see in the picture, with the socialization too. Helps that child who is deafblind be able to interact with other students who may not communicate in the same modality that they do. So today our matrix is going to cover two key assessments, the communication matrix and the CVI range. And so why is it important for us to even complete these assessments? Why do we need these to use to develop an appropriate plan for our students? Well, we need to know how our students are communicating. We need to determine what their current level is and how we can bridge them and move them to the next, increase their opportunities to move them to the next level. What accommodations do we need? What items do we need to provide them with for them to be successful and to track some meaningful progress? So one assessment, in case everybody is not familiar with this, this is out of the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. They have created what is called the IFHE, I-F-H-E. It's the Informal Functional Hearing Evaluation. And really what it is it's exactly as it says. It's an informal questionnaire for students who an audiogram might not show that they have a hearing loss, but if the student functionally does not appear to be receiving auditory information in a typical fashion, this is an assessment that can be utilized by families or school systems to kind of get a snapshot of how that student is functionally responding or not responding to auditory information, and to give a team an understanding of what that student may or may not be able to access so that they can tweak how they're providing information to the student if necessary. So it's not just another good tool to have in your toolbox, especially for our students with multiple needs who a traditional test might not show a deficit or where they might be currently functioning. And so sometimes we need some supplemental tools to kind of give us a better snapshot of what our students are functionally doing.
Jen, real quick, this is Chris. Jen had mentioned earlier a webinar that I think you can access maybe through the California Deafblind Services from Maurice Belote.
Or Path to Literacy.
Or Path to Literacy, right? On kind of connecting CVI with auditory processing disorder. For many of our kids with CVI, it's very difficult to actually formally diagnose auditory processing disorder or central auditory processing disorder, CAPD, or auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, ANSD, right? More acronyms for you. It can be very hard to formally diagnose those for students who do not have formal language, because often the tests for diagnosis rely on response using formal language systems. So for students who are pre-symbolic, it can be more of a challenge. But for some of our kids with CVI, we may be able to get some good information about how auditory information is processed using this assessment, the IFHE, the IFHE. So that may not constitute a formal diagnosis, but it may help with making adaptations, environmental adaptations. The last thing to consider there with auditory processing disorders and CVI is that what looks like an auditory issue with accessing auditory information may actually just be wrapped up in the impact of multisensory complexity, right? Because CVI is really all about juggling sensory modalities and sensory input at the same time. A child who has difficulty using their vision when they're also touching, or when they're also listening, or may have difficulty listening when they're also looking. And it can be any combination of those things. So you may consider that an auditory processing disorder, even if it's not formally or clinically one, because the senses and sensory input are still experiencing some difficulty with balance, right? Which is a functional auditory processing disorder, even if it's not a clinical one. Back to you.
Sweet, thank you. All right, so here is the I don't say tool, but item that we have created. And Chris and I are going to walk you through it real quick, if I can get it open for those guys who were not on last year. So last year, this was still kind of in process. We were still working on it. So this year, we think we're finally have come to completion, we'd like to say. And so at the end of this session today, you'll get an email from Sherry, and it will include this attachment. So we will be sending out the document to you all. We would love for everybody, your homework between now and Thursday, feel free to look it over, read it over, come back with any questions. We are interested in feedback on it. We are interested in teams doing a pilot of it and providing us with information on how it's used and if it's successful. We tried reaching out to a couple teams over the last year, but with COVID and everybody being virtual, it was a lot harder for teams to be able to kind of gather together and meet and utilize it. So we're really hoping that this can become a useful tool for everybody and it be something that you guys can utilize within a team. So feel free to provide us with information on how you guys are doing that. So it starts out with a lot of just information, background information on cortical visual impairment and the communication matrix. So links to other online courses, virtual webinars, fact sheets, anything and everything that you could want and need to learn about CVI or the communication matrix if you're not already familiar with either of those things. Our table of contents. Again, this is kind of covering what we've just recently talked about, why we created this matrix, that we're looking to really kind of create a balanced communication plan that matches both a child's student's sensory access with their current communication level access. And our hope is that we can create a system that's going to grow with a student. And we're going to talk about kind of that transition and progression from a 3D tangible system to maybe something 2D, to then moving on to high-tech AEC, using printed words. So we're really talking about hopefully supporting you all in creating a system that will grow and build with the child to move them along, not only in their communication level, but also in the CVI range. Just a basic description of our tool and what we've got. Chris, any thoughts on this as I go through this?
This is Chris. The one thing I would say is that we tried to kind of give you all of the information and background resources that you would need so that this does supplement the presentation today and on Thursday. But a lot of what we're talking about today and on Thursday is here in the document itself as well. So there's a lot of background context. There's a lot of defining terms. There are, as Jen showed, there are links to additional resources, including full webinars on the communication matrix, information about CVI. And then, so it's designed to be used by anybody. You don't necessarily need extensive training or specific expertise to hopefully find this useful.
And mention of, things more recent from Christine Roman, her VLLC framework that she has in her most recent book. We refer to that here also as a good thing to utilize as a resource as well. We're going to talk about these pages a little bit more as we go through the presentation. So I will just say that this is kind of the grid that we created of, there's the 7 levels of the communication matrix, and we kind of broke them down into 3 levels that we use throughout our document. But we will look at that a little further. General considerations for CVI, of course, always a good thing to have. From phase 1 through phase 2 and phase 3. This page is where you would plot the results of your students' assessments, both the CVI range as well as the communication matrix. And so you'll see it kind of gives you a grid. And so students might end up in more than one location. A student does not necessarily have to be strictly a concrete symbolic communicator in early phase 2. They may be moving through 1 or 2 of the different sections, but this is going to kind of give you that target bullet point, might help kind of zone in, so you're not having to necessarily read through the entire thing. But if you get a student and based on their results of the communication matrix and the CVI range, they end up being an abstract communicator in phase 3, you can head right to that section of the matrix. And then we will highlight some of these pages throughout the presentation as well, but just wanted to show you that we've kind of broken it down by phase of CVI, and then our columns are based on the different levels of communication. So we've got 3 different levels, the emerging pre-symbolic, we talked about, our concrete communicators who are in the middle, and then our abstract symbolic communicators on the right-hand side. And that is broken down for each phase, including phase 2 being broken out into early and late phase 2, because as we know, those considerations significantly change as students start moving into 2G in late phase 2.
Jen, this is Chris. A couple questions. Can it be used by a parent? Absolutely, definitely. It can be used by anybody who knows the student well. And Cheryl had a great question for clarification. Do you advise that these both need to be completed before recommending a communication system for an individual? Yes, absolutely, because before recommending any kind of expressive communication system for a student, you need to have done functional vision assessment and a communication assessment, which should be, of their current expressive communication. For many of our students, certainly for our students with CVI, the CVI range is an appropriate functional vision assessment, and the communication matrix is an appropriate expressive communication assessment for students who are communicating on a pre-symbolic or emerging symbolic level. So that's the idea. We've sort of married those two assessments together to provide recommendations based on the results of the combined results of the CVI range and the communication matrix. And
yeah, so I have completed both of those and understand what that means, how that's impacting a student's development. I know with the communication matrix, implementing the tool, it is a pretty useful and easy tool. So we're gonna go through that today for anybody who's going, that's not my area of strength. But being able to not only complete it and present the results, but okay, what does this mean for the student as to where they are and how we're gonna help them progress in their depth and their breadth of communication to really utilize that. Sorry, Chris, did I cut you off?
No, this is Chris. No, not at all. Nope, perfectly tag team there. So the one more question from Arlene, what happens if you have a student that is deaf and blind, but this is only one part of the student with multiple severe to profound syndromes?
Yeah, I mean, so we're gonna get, this is only one part, meaning that there's additional needs and additional disabilities.
I think that's what the
motor and all of that stuff. So absolutely. So we're going to talk through a lot of the strategies that we have in here that we've broken down, which hopefully help with students who have significant multiple needs. Definitely, because those students who have our multiple needs are typically our pre-symbolic communicators that we're struggling to determine an accessible communication system for, right?
Yeah, this is Chris, and I would just piggyback on that to say that whoever your student is individually or your child is individually, there may be more individualized assessment that's needed in other categories or in these categories. You may need to supplement the CVI assessment with the communication assessment with other things too, even a behavioral assessment or a more comprehensive sensory profile, a preferences assessment, literacy assessments, or even tactile discrimination assessments. So when you speak about student-centered assessment, that means assessment that is individualized to that student, that child, and also holistic, considering multiple different domains, not just the few that we're focusing on here. So if you have questions about other specific areas for assessment, we can definitely recommend additional protocol for you.
And so then as we go through, really it's just we have an index of terms. So any terms that we use throughout the matrix are identified and explained here in the back half of it. Especially if you walk away from this presentation today going, that's a lot of stuff and I don't really remember everything that was covered. There's definitely some references here in the document to all of the different strategies and options that we mentioned. Some visual examples.
Jen, Kathy mentioned Tanny Anthony's materials discussing sensory preferences. Those are fantastic, and we may actually have some of those in the appendix. I think we did reference that somewhere. She also did an update to the learning media assessment and sensory channel form. I think maybe the sensory channel form is in there somewhere, but if not, that's an important assessment too.
I don't know that we have Tanny stuff in our additional resources, but that would be definitely something to locate.
And you can just Google Tanny Anthony sensory channel form.
Yeah, if you find something and want to put it in the chat box, that would be great. Because yes, her stuff is really good. Thank you for that. All right, now I'm trying to remember how I get back to the PowerPoint. Good times. All right. Something tells me, are we in the, okay. So like we scrolled through before and showed you, so this is the page where you're gonna kind of start and you're gonna plot your students' results from their communication matrix and the CVI range score. just to kind of give you, and in whatever format you want to, write it in, whatever notes you want to add. Do you want to just stick an X and find that section in the matrix? This is really just a however meets your needs kind of document. Good. So just to recap, we're not talking about what the student is capable of or what they understand receptively, because we know our students are certainly capable of much more sometimes than they are even able to show us. And oftentimes are receptively in taking in and understanding more information than they are able to give back to us. So we are, as we said, presuming competence in our students, but we are really currently in this presentation focusing on the expressive levels and modalities of our students' communication. Communication matrix. So for those of you guys who are familiar with this, feel free to become active and give us some more examples as I go through some of these levels and things that you have come across with your students that you have used this with. There are 7 levels of communication, everything from pre-intentional, which is our most basic infantile responses, all the way up to formal language. And we're going to go through these. If you're somebody who's not familiar with completing the matrix online, it is in an online form. You can access it from the website, communicationmatrix.org. There is a parent-friendly version and a professional version, but professionals can easily use the parent-friendly version as well. That includes pictures, and it really is a self-explanatory kind of walkthrough of the questionnaire. And so it starts out with a general overview question that gets you into the section that asks more in-depth questions. So for example, this first one is, do I know that my student, can they let me know if they are uncomfortable or happy? And you just answer yes, no, or my child. If you're familiar with the matrix, you can then choose my child has surpassed this stage if that's something that you know that they are beyond. But if you're a new parent opening this for the first time or a professional, it can't certainly hurt to say yes. And then that opens up all the questions in that section and you can easily go through each question. So it's pretty friendly in that it gives you photographs, it gives you videos to help kind of give examples for things if a parent is going through this and is unsure how to answer that question. And then once you complete all of the questions, or as you're going through, if you say yes, then you need to choose a why. It asks you to pick something, is it a body movement? Is it a sound? Is it a facial expression? What does the child do to show you that they are uncomfortable or happy or whatever the question may be? And you can choose if that skill is emerging or if it is mastered. There also is a section at the bottom for comments. No. So there's a box at the bottom for comments. And that's a really great section to put in exactly what the child does, because oftentimes our children might not even respond in the typical fashion that is listed here. They give you a lot of great examples that you can choose from, but maybe your student does something that's different or very specific that you want to highlight for the team, for the family, to show the student communicates a certain topic or a certain need in this specific fashion. And that way everybody who reads the document will be able to know that. You do, in order to progress to the next question, you do have to pick something from the list of suggestions that they offer you. So maybe taking that specific thing the child does, but finding the topic that it goes under, if it's a body movement or a sound. And so clicking one of the buttons, either emerging or mastered, just so that you can get to the next question. But then again, using that comment section to really be specific in what that child does. Then once you complete the questionnaire, it'll spit out a grid that doesn't look exactly like this because there's colors and words on here, but looks very similar to this. It'll show in different color variations if the student is emerging, if they've mastered a skill, if it's a section that they've completely surpassed. And so you'll be able to kind of track via the grid and see it in a more nice format to be able to see where the student is at and what skills they still need to be working And this picture just kind of breaks it out really nicely and to see that those initial top levels are very behavior focused. And then as we move down into the next two, we're starting to get a message from a student in a more unconventional form. Then we start moving into more symbolic symbols, form of communication, and then down into that real formal communication that follows the syntax and the structure of formal language. So this picture is something that is very wonderfully created by the New York Deafblind Project. So if you are interested in this in a poster format or PDF format, Chris can easily share this with people. That gives some great examples of things that you might see from a student in ways that they are communicating and some strategies for helping them progress to the next level. But as we use the communication matrix, things that you're looking for to determine are, has the student mastered levels? Are they making progress in their communication? Are there emerging skills that we need to continue working on and bringing out of them? Are they communicating across functions? As you saw before, there was 4 functions of communication: refusal, or to get rid of, to obtain something, for social, and providing information. So are they communicating across functions, or are they only communicating for one function and we need to focus on other areas? Are they communicating across routines, different communication partners? This is a great tool to be completed by both the family and the school system if the child's in school, because sometimes you will see our students communicate differently at home and at school, and school will have a very limited communication matrix and say, we're not really getting, the student's not really communicating a lot. And the parents going, well, mine is very, very different. I see them communicating in all these different ways. And so that's when the conversation needs to happen of, okay, what are you doing at home? How are you setting up this environment for the student to express these things? Or what are the things that they are talking about and wanting to communicate about? Can those then be lined and also set up at school so that the student is getting success across different environments? So the first level is that pre-intentional behavior. It's not under the student control, it's spontaneous, it is reactionary, it is just that feeling of hungry or wet like an infant would do. So some basic examples are just showing discomfort, showing comfort. But other ones that you might see in our students who have more complex needs might be changes in breathing. Chris can tell you about a student who they really didn't see much communication from at all, and the nurse noticed that his heart rate was changing. Correct, Chris? When was shown something red, the nurse noticed that his heart rate increased. And so that was that student reacting and communicating that he recognized, that he was seeing something. Changes in body temperature, arcing back, those things that our students do that are just basic, very reactive, reflexive, changes in posture, changes in tone, that if we might recognize as communication of they like something or they don't like something. And for those of you guys who have used this tool before, feel free to throw out other examples in the chat box, things that you have seen with your students. If we work as a team and as a group, it helps everybody to kind of think of other things that we need to be looking for in our students as ways that they are communicating. And so here is a video example. Can I get it to?
We're gonna stand up. Walk.
All right, so if people want to go ahead and real quick, throw some things in the chat box. What did you see in that video? What were some things that that child was expressing? And I'm going to kind of keep going for the sake of time because I want us to also be able to take a short break, since I know sitting is like the new smoking now for everybody, and paying attention for 2 hours straight is really hard. But Chris, if you get some comments in the chat box, let me know. So how do we help our kids move from that pre-intentional, those reflexive, those most basic, just reactionary behaviors to some more intentional movements, intentional behaviors? The adult needs to interpret that movement. So all of those things that student's doing, that adult needs to be reactive and interpret what those movements, those sounds, those behaviors were that student was expressing. You know, did she look happy? Definitely not. Was she enjoying that activity? Definitely not, you know, initially. So just being able to recognize that and respond to those pulling back of the arm, those behaviors as that child trying to communicate something. And over time, that student's going to learn that those movements and sounds can be meaningful and meet a variety of needs. You know, that child's going to learn to trust that that teacher, when that student pulls her hand back, that someone's not going to go grab it and continue to force them to do something that they really do not want to do. They're going to recognize that that adult is responding to that action and, you know, not requiring them to. So they're, what am I losing? Where are the words, Chris? Where are the words? The adult over time is going to learn that as the child does something and responds accordingly, that action has a meaning to them. And so that can be used across a variety of settings and opportunities for them to express that same thing. Words are hard.
This is Chris. Jen, you got it. But just to quickly interrupt you, there are many excellent comments, mostly observations about the video, which are specific. And I think it's important to say that when you watch each of those videos, the first one, the second one that Jen will show you next, what you want to be thinking about is not necessarily what do these things mean, but before you come to interpreting, just observing, just identifying what was the specific behavior that I observed. And if you can just think about recording a behavior without thinking about what does it mean yet. We know, as several people said, we saw very clearly that those behaviors were mostly expressing discomfort, right? But what are the specific behaviors that the child uses to express discomfort? Arching the back, facial expressions, vocalizations, those are the specific behaviors. And when you get more comfortable with that process of just observing before you jump to conclusions, that will help you with using the communication matrix, because mostly what you're doing on that assessment is recording observations. And then you're going to see as you record them, what function do they fit into?
Perfect.
Cool.
All right. So then after we get moved from that very most basic pre-symbolic level, then we get into intentional behavior. So now the child is intentionally doing something, but it's not directed at somebody. So for example, if you give a child, you know, if you put a cup on a child's tray and they just take it and pitch it because that's not what they wanted to drink. So it's not directed at somebody, it's just achieving a desired result. And so some examples for this might be moving towards something or away from something. This might be the student that just kind of gets up from the circle time area and leaves the room. This can also be sensory seeking behaviors, things that they do just to meet a need. But it also might be some self-injurious behaviors that are fulfilling a need. And those are the ones we kind of need to look at and be careful of, because sometimes those behaviors, the sensory seeking or self-injurious, can start as fulfilling an internal need, but as people react to them, because of course we don't want our students to be hurting themselves. As we react to those behaviors, it can become a communication tool, because, ooh, when I do said behavior, I get the buffet of options of all of my favorite things presented to me, or I get a ton of attention from a whole bunch of people. So it can turn into a directed communication, and something that we don't necessarily want to be used as a communication tool. And so how do we move kids from this level into some more unconventional communication? We want to involve ourselves in the child's activity behavior. What are they doing? We're going to kind of sabotage that routine. So this is the area where, you know, a child if the cookies that they want are on the counter and they just walk over and take the box of cookies. Well, next time, maybe we could stick it up on the top shelf so that they no longer can reach it themselves. Now they're going to have to find a way to engage with someone or do something to still achieve that desired result, and hopefully communicate with someone to make that request. Modeling that communication, having that item be just out of the child's reach, and modeling that communication for them of what we want them to do to ask for that item that they need. Giving them only part of the materials that they need, setting them up for a mealtime, and you've got your food and your plate, but you don't have a spoon. Darn, what are we gonna do now? Possibly with our hands and our fingers, but because our kids are very clever, so in not having to communicate and ask for things, but setting up that activity or setting up an environment where the child needs to communicate something to get what they want or they need. Don't we have a video for that one? Did we lose the video? Maybe it's the next one.
Are you looking for the video for intentional communication? It's for
it's after unconventional.
Yeah. So because this is Chris, sorry. The idea behind intentional behavior is that it's really just doing things, acting upon the world without involving another person. So a child is using intentional behavior when they're doing really anything that doesn't involve another person. Picking up an object or pushing an object away, but another person isn't involved. So we don't have a video of that, but you could imagine that pretty easily.
And so then that gets us to what we call unconventional communication. So this is the child expressing something to someone else, but it might not be in a conventional means. They're not using necessarily a specific sign or a specific word. It's something that may not be understood by the general public, but somebody that knows the child well or is familiar with the context of the situation or what the child's most preferred items are might have a better idea of what the child is trying to express and ask for. So some examples of this might be pulling someone's hand or clothing, dragging them towards something, pulling an adult's hand towards something that they want, directed facial expression or body posture, leaning towards something, towards a person, towards a preferred item. Blowing raspberries is a great example. I had a child that was very motorically involved. And so he started blowing raspberries because it was something that he could do. He had more control over his facial muscles than his arms and legs. And as a young child, everybody thought it was very, very cute. It was adorable. So when he started blowing raspberries, what did all the adults do? Started blowing raspberries back at him. Of course, now we're having a conversation back and forth, but he also realized this is a way to get attention and to initiate engagement with others. So he would just randomly start blowing raspberries at people, at peers, at other adults. And so we eventually had to shape that because he can't just blow raspberries all the time. But it worked for him. It was something that he physically could do and that he used to initiate conversation and engagement with other people. But if you didn't know him or know that that's what he was doing, that might not have been conventionally understood by somebody else who just randomly walked into the room. And so we do have a video of that. So does anybody want to put in the chat box on what they saw in that video? And so that was a good example too, as you'll see with Grace, that she, with our students who are deafblind, like I talked about before, we kind of need to set up the who and the where and the how for our students to communicate. So as a deafblind kid, she is someone that is beginning to use tactile ASL. And so isn't necessarily spontaneously signing. And so presenting, she really wouldn't have done anything if I hadn't had my hands there as I'm here to communicate with you. I'm setting this up as do something with me, manipulate me, show me what you want. And that got her then to put my hands back down into the leaves and say, I want you to do this action again. If I was not there as the active listener though, would she have seeked out my support to find a way to communicate with me? Hopefully in another manner she would have, but that just creates that active listener. I'm an active listener waiting for you to tell me what you want me to do. Good. And so how do we move from that unconventional to now more conventional forms of communication? So continuing to provide those opportunities to communicate, continuing to model for our students more conventional gestures, using that hand under hand support that we're going to talk about, modeling signs for them, using some coactive signing, which is where with the adult helps just manipulate the child's hands to form a sign. Providing, again, lots of those opportunities for children to be required to use communication. Back to this page that I showed you from our document. So this is just where it breaks it out that you'll see on the left of the chart, there are 7 levels of communication, and those are the 7 levels that are outlined in the communication matrix. And then we kind of grouped them. So you'll see that the first 3 levels that we just talked about are kind of grouped into that emerging pre-symbolic communicator, those that are not using formalized modalities of communication yet to express things. And then now we're going to start getting into our concrete communicators. And then the final 2 levels, you'll see we kind of group as our abstract symbolic communicators. So this just gives you an indication of how the 7 levels from the matrix itself match up with the 3 in our document. And so this is one of the breakout pages that you saw in the document. And so this is just a snapshot of the phase 1 page. And so we're going to look at, if we were talking about a pre-symbolic communicator, we're going to go through some of the things that we've got outlined in here to help you know what we're talking about when we list these things, if you plan on using this to help develop a plan with a student. So the first thing is touch cues. And so what are touch cues? They are a touch at a specific place on a student's body that we do consistently to convey information about something that's going to come up. They also can provide information. They can be used as a concrete referent if they're paired with a sign. It's not meaningless prodding or prompting. These have a purpose. So here's a set of examples. And this is something that if you have a team, an educational team, you guys can utilize and create a specific set of touch cues that you're going to use with a student across the board. So for example, putting on or taking off AFOs for a student, their orthotics. If maybe the whole team determines that they're going to touch the student on their leg, to let them know that that they're going to be taking them on or putting them on or taking them off. And everybody uses that with the student, and that's great. If you've got to create a system that's utilized to allow the student to anticipate what's going to happen, it can also then eventually become possibly an expressive modality for the student. That student might tap the side of their leg if they have the ability to do so, to let somebody know, hey, you forgot to put my AFOs on, or where are they? Or I'd like them to be taken off because it hurts. So these can become an expressive modality for students as well, but it's a way to let them know what's going to happen. And my little soapbox is, even if the team or a family or whoever's working with the child does not create a formalized system that everybody uses across the board, Touch cues are a way to simply let an individual know that something is going to happen and that someone is going to invade their space. Our students should have the respect as human beings to be warned when someone is going to touch their body or invade their space for anything, such as putting glasses on, hearing aids, cochlear implants, suctioning of a trach, all of those things. It's simply a way to orient the student to something is going to happen to me, and it's likely going to happen to this part of my body that someone is touching. For our deafblind students, it's even a way, a tap on the shoulder, just to orient them to someone is there with them. Let them know, hey, I'm here, and then I'm going to touch you in a place to let you know also where I'm going to touch you or what's going to happen to you. So it simply provides respect. For some of our students, it's a way to let them know if there's something that very aversive that happens, like suctioning of a trach. You know, some of our kids might be able to hear that machine. It's very loud when it turns on. They might be able to hear that, and that anxiety is going to ramp up when they hear the machine because they know it's coming. Well, what happens if they're in a classroom with 5 other kids that also have suction machines? That student's anxiety is going to ramp up every time they hear that machine turn on, whether it's their turn or someone else's turn, unless we do something and give them some sort of cue as a warning to, now this is going to happen to you. It is your turn. And if we do that, that will lessen their anxiety when it's not happening to them. So touch cues can have a lot of benefit of just a way to engage with a student and provide them information to anticipate what's going to happen. Name cues. So this is just a way to represent a concrete form to represent an individual, a tactile means of identifying one person versus the other. For our students with CDI, we know that faces are very hard to discriminate. So if a student has 4 different providers who are all white females with mid-length brown hair, how are they going to be able to determine their teacher from their OT, from their PT, and know who's who in different environments? So this is just a distinct way to help discriminate one person from the other, especially for our children who also have hearing loss, who are not able to discriminate one voice, the sound of someone's voice. The picture at the bottom is just an example of mine that I use, and it's a rubber spiky bracelet. So it's safe, but it's also very tactily unique, because many of us wear a watch, many of us wear a smartwatch, but if everybody uses their smartwatch as their cue to identify themselves, well, now everybody is the same, is tactily the same as well as visually the same. So finding something that can be very tactily distinct or unique that you have with you at all times when you're working with a student. It can also be used as a way to start and end an engagement with a student. When you come in and you greet the student, you can give them your tactile cue, if it's your lanyard with your ID or your bracelet or whatever it is, to say it's now time to start this interaction or therapy session. And then when you leave and you're done, you take the item back to signal that the activity is finished. So it can provide a lot of different purposes, but it's also a way for our students to be able to identify us in a classroom, outside in the community, outside on the playground, where they might not be visually accessible with the sun or whatever the case may be. So it's just another way to help our students be able to discriminate one person from the other and learn who we are. It should be paired with a name sign or a spoken name for our students to hopefully develop that as well. But again, just a way to help them bridge that gap. Anticipation calendar. So this is where our kids start first, is with real objects in anticipation calendar. If you're not familiar with calendar systems for deafblind students, and this is something that can help all of our students with multiple needs, is providing them with some sort of calendar system that helps alert them to the activities of their day. And we start with what we call an anticipation calendar, which is simply one object that represents the next activity that's going to happen, and a finish bin. So you'll see here there's 2 distinct bins, one with the object that represents the next activity that's coming up, and then the finish bin for when that is done. we want these objects to be tactily accessible for our students, especially if they are in the earlier phases of CVI, and tactily unique. Because we know for our students who are in phase 1, or maybe even early phase 2, depending on the environment, we would hope that they meet their CVI needs, that they are visually accessible for them to recognize or to regard, but that they might not be able to use them to identify or discriminate what that object is or what it's referring to. So they also need to be tactily unique so that they can use that tactile sense for the ability to discriminate what that object is. And then you can also add some finished box adaptations to make them more visually accessible for the student, bright colors, very large, but just different adaptations or ways to set up a system for a student. And it can be anything that works for the team, something that stands still that the student can roll up to or walk up to and access in the same place in the classroom every day. Maybe it's something that you need with a bag, 2 different bags or 2 different connected containers that could travel with the student from place to place. It's really a team decision for whatever works best for that student and their needs. So at the asset anticipation level, how do we present these items? We're showing the student whatever the object is that we're using right before the activity. We're pairing it with language, hopefully with the language, especially for some of our students who are deaf and hard of hearing and learning just labels for things. We're pairing with the language of what the object is, because this is a holistic, it is an object, it's a thing. And then what it's referring to, the activity that's referring to as well. So this is your paintbrush, because it's time to go to art. Here is your diaper, because it's time to go do a toileting routine type of thing. So we're still pairing it with the language of what the item is and what its activity it's referring to. And then we want to go do that thing. If we wait a while, if we get distracted and we don't actually head to that activity, then that language and that pairing moment is kind of lost there. So we quickly want to then take that object with us and go to that activity. And hopefully the purpose at the beginning is that object is something that child is going to use in the activity. So I take this with me and I use it there, or I have it with me. If it's an abstract activity like circle time, I take my circle time symbol with me to circle time, and it's with me while I'm at circle time until circle time is done, and then it's put in the finished box and it's over. So like I said, we take it with us to the activity. We refer to it frequently again. We are still here at circle time. We are, this is still music time. You still have your bells for music. Just reintroducing and referring back to that object so that student can start making that connection between that item or that symbol and the activity that it refers to. And then when it's done, we put it in a finished box and we repeat. Consistency is the key. And so this is an example, a parent example of an object schedule. And Chris, this was your parent. So do you have thoughts you want to chat on this?
Hi, this is Chris. So yes, this is just a nice example. I don't actually know this parent, but this is a nice example from Paths to Literacy that is specifically geared toward a student with CVI. And what I really like about this example, if you look at you can find the link at the bottom too, or you can just look for that title, Transitioning from an Object Schedule System to Photos for a Child with CVI. You can find that on Paths to Literacy. What I really like is that it shows how a communication system transforms as the child makes progress both visually and in terms of their expressive communication. So we start with just a basic object schedule. On the left there in the picture, you're seeing those kind of wildly overpriced American Printing House for the Blind calendar boxes. They're really just foam boxes. But you have an actual object that is being used to directly to communicate about an activity. So that's not even a symbolic system. That's just an object being used to communicate, yes, it's time for lunch. Let's go get our lunch from the calendar, right? From the calendar box. And we put it in a finish box and we go and we see what's next. The diaper is there, so next it's time for toileting or changing. Okay. So as the child makes progress, we start to take those objects and use partial versions of those objects as tangible symbols. So that shows the students' progress in expressive communication. Now they're ready for partial object symbols. At the same time, the child's vision is progressing with regard to CVI. They were maybe a phase 1 child, now they are in phase 2, and they're able to use materials that are more appropriate for a child in phase 2. I think if you hit next slide.
Yep. For some reason it's
so
not
now
right.
on
There
the
we
right.
go.
Okay. Now, as the child moves further into phase 2, now they're in mid to late phase 2 probably. We know that they have eye to object contact and they have ability to discriminate two-dimensional materials. Now we're taking photographs of what used to be tactile or tangible objects. So see, we are seeing how a communication system doesn't need to be gotten rid of. It just needs to evolve as the child makes progress visually and in their expressive communication at the same time. That's what's unique to CVI. The progress in communication is the same as any other child with a visual impairment. But with CVI, the visual adaptation changes at the same time because we're seeing progress in both areas. If you hit it one more time, you'll see those 2D symbols now starting to be used in a more, what we called a transitional communication system, which is more of like a variety of functions of a communication system, like sequencing, choice making, even to embed in literacy and in daily routines, except now it's more of an expansive communication system and not just one object at a time or one activity at a time. So I think this is a really great example, but I think it's a nice visual example, but it's also a great reminder of how we need to be thinking about the end goal, even as we start with the beginning steps. So we have to have in our mind, okay, where is this going long term, so that we create a system that is able to evolve with the child.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. And so then we can move up, our students can start, maybe they start at that, single object level, and then we move them up to more expanded systems as their communication system level increases. So these are just some examples of some expanded calendar systems that incorporate multiple objects throughout the child's day. So now we're setting up a schedule, more of a schedule for them to kind of follow. We're doing this and then this and then this, and anticipate the activities of their day, which also for some of our students will allow us to show changes in the calendar of their day. If a student is very stuck to a rigid schedule and something's going to be different, this allows us to walk them through it and show them where that change is going to happen. Opportunities to work on sequencing. So we're talking first and next. First and second, we're going to do this first, and then we're going to do this. So we're doing something non-preferred first, and then you get to do something preferred. So giving that anticipation of when a preferred activity is going to happen, and allowing the child to be able to sequence through. This thing's done, now we do the next thing. Using them for literacy purposes. So we're working on objects moving from left to right. We're working on communication and labeling of items, or we're working on symbols and identification of more abstract symbols. Photographs for starting to move to 2D also can be used for conversations, incorporating sitting down with the child at the beginning of the day and building the schedule of their day, providing them with opportunities to make choices for preferred activities or free time activities. Sometimes students might move objects around to show, hey, I'd rather do this than do that, or this is an activity I don't like, so I'd like to put it at the end of the day or take it out of the calendar completely. So it's an opportunity to have a conversation about likes and dislikes.
2 of our teachers are on.
You know, what do you want to do first? What do you want to do second? That type of thing. So opportunities for lots of communication, interaction, covers a wide variety, and can be used for expressive communication if this is accessible to the student at some point. Something that they could go over to and take out of an object out of the bin to request an activity that they like, request something that they need. So this was just the second page of the, when I highlighted that first snapshot, that first calendar, that first column under phase 1 and listed all of those strategies that we just went through. This was page 2, so it added in hand under hand and some consideration for voice output devices. So just wanted to, that's what we're going to cover now. So hand under hand is the big term of the day. We're going to take something away, take away, hand under hand, not hand over hand. What is hand under hand? Simply what you see in this photograph here. It is the child's hands on top of the adult's hands participating in something, in an activity together. If you want more information, there's a great article on hand under hand from Barbara Miles, and you will see the link to that on the left. And we can get that link into the chat box, I bet, for people to access. And so why do we use hand under hand? The purpose of it is the adult is doing something and the student is observing them by having their hands on top of the adults. It's non-controlling. It allows for that shared experience. For our students who are deaf-blind, like we said, they miss all of that incidental learning to see what something does. What is this object? How do I use it? What's its purpose? How do I play with it? And so lots of our kids are very quick to pick up and drop things or not actively engage with materials for a long time because they just haven't had the experience to know what this does or what I'm supposed to do with it or how I manipulate it. So using hand under hand allows us to model for the student what something does, how to use it. And the student is able to participate in the manner that in the amount of sensory information that they can handle. So this is how we provide joint attention to our deaf-blind students. With a student who has vision, we might be, pointing to something, oh, look at that. And the student visually engages with the same thing that the adult does. For our students who maybe for CDI purposes don't have something can't see something at that distance, or for our deaf-blind students, this is the way to have that joint attention of actively, both the adult and the child are attending to the same thing at the same time and having that shared experience. It reduces the sensory complexity for some of our students that are tactically defensive or can't handle a lot of sensory input. This allows the student to participate in the manner that they feel comfortable with. They control the interaction. They have the ability to remove their hand if it's too much and come back when they feel ready for it. As you saw with that student in the very first video, she'd take her hand away, and initially when she was ready, then she would come back to the adult. So the same thing when we're exploring or manipulating an object. And the hope is that we are transitioning that child to more active independent engagement, because as the student becomes more comfortable, then the adult can slowly move their hand out from underneath of them. It's also not who's controlling the action. If we're doing hand over hand, whose brain is doing the work? Is the child actively engaging with something? No, it's the adult that has their, is manipulating the whole experience. So hand under hand is a way to allow the student to be an active participant in the activity. So just something to think about, and feel free to put your comments in the chat box. But how does hand under hand versus hand over hand impact that multisensory complexity for our students with CDI? Who maybe can't handle looking and having physical contact with someone at the same time, hint, hint. And also, how could hand under hand support visually guided reach? Any additional considerations when we're thinking about ways that we help our students interact with objects and participate in that visually guided reach that we need to help model for them. I had a question before from a participant about our students that have CP that are very, very constricted and maybe can't, have very limited mobility with their hands, and how do we do hand under hand with those students? And it's really, figuring out initially, of course, why that child is contracted. Is it a physical thing that they are very contracted from their muscle tone? Are they very defensive over things that are externally outside of their body? Can also be a thing. But really it's, starting to we have to approach them where they're at and starting to get them to just accept people being in physical contact with them, slowly under their hands. Possibly you're working from a distant, from a more safe environment for them, which might be the shoulder or the elbow, and slowly moving your contact down to support them maybe at the elbow in reaching out a little bit. So it definitely is individualized in getting our students to be able to accept just physical tactile contact. And that might be where we have to start before we're really getting them to accept having our hands under theirs, to manipulate them in any sort of manner to interact with something. This also is a great transition to tactile ESL. Why won't we click? There we go. And so here's just a quick little video of hand under hand.
All right, so let's try again. Help me. Oh. Help me one more time. Oh, good job. Can we pull it apart, TT? Give me your hand. Put your thumb in the middle and look. Whoa. All right, I'm going to put that inside the great bag. Look, there's little sections, TT. Come on, Taylor, help me. Help me. We're going to take one, okay? And we're going to examine it. Let's do it.
So you can see this is a student who was new to feeding. Feeding was a new thing for her. Foods was a new experience for her. And she was wanting nothing to do with touching this orange on her own. And so mom really does a great job of just encouraging her to participate with mom in the amount that she is willing to, or that she is able to. And so they are having this shared experience together. Now they're exploring this item together, using hand under hand. And voice output devices. So at the most basic pre-symbolic level, voice output devices can have a place. But for our students that are at that most pre-symbolic level, who are emerging with their communication and are not formally using a formal communication system yet, not only do we need to, do they need to have words that are put on a device such as this that are meaningful and appropriate to them and what they want to communicate, but we also have to teach them the purpose and the use of this device. If it's something that only appears during story time, when it's presented to them and they are taught that when it's placed in front of me, I hit this thing and then it goes away because it goes to the next student or whatever the case may be. And that's repeated multiple times through multiple different activities, possibly with a different message. They then are learning potentially a task. The task of when this device is presented to me, I hit it and I get praised and reinforced, because apparently that's what these adults want me to do. But they may not understand the purpose or the meaning behind what they are doing or what they are expressing through this device. So one thing is definitely having it present with the child at all times, if that's a possibility, so that it's there not only when we would like them to use it to express something, but also when they want to initiate expression on their own. And at this most basic pre-symbolic level, using it for something that can be immediately reinforced or provides a specific concrete interaction. So for example, programming it to say hello and having the student go and say hello to each one of their classmates in the morning when they arrive, during circle time or that greeting time, so that it is an immediate back and forth, an immediate reaction between, you know, for communication, direct communication between themselves and another person. Or something that can be immediately reinforced, that they are requesting something that someone is immediately going to respond to them, so that they understand that when I hit this thing, it has a purpose, and this is the purpose that it has. So Big Macs definitely have their place, but used when we're using them at this most basic level, we have to teach the student the purpose of why it exists. Conventional communication. So conventional gestures are simply that. You're pointing, nodding, high five, fist bump, things that are socially understood. And so for some of our students with CVI, this might be a level that's really difficult for them because they are not getting that visual imitation until phase 3. And for some of our students with motoric concerns, this might be a level that we just skip. This might be something that they are not capable of producing, and that's okay. So let's just look at some of these. Pointing, shaking our head, waving high. So yeah, it's just those socially appropriate skills, but this might be a section that some of our students have to just skip over, and that's okay if we're moving to a more concrete exchange of objects or symbols for them. But here's an example.
Ready? Shall I wipe your chin? Is it feeling sticky? I'll wipe your chin. First your hand. Yeah. And then your chin. Okay.
And so you see just more of a conventional, something that would be possibly understood by lots of people, that she wanted her chin wiped, that may be understood by somebody who doesn't necessarily know the student as well. For time purposes, let's roll in because we got like 4 minutes. We'll maybe get through one more thing. So for concrete communication, now we're going to start talking about some concrete communication symbols, which we maybe, I don't know, Chris, what's your thought? This gets us into a lot of stuff. Do we want to hold this for?
This is Chris. I think we're going to get into the actual uses and more specifically the adaptations of tangible symbols during the next session, when we really talk about modalities of expressive communication. Our goal for this session was understanding communication development, and then some of the considerations that may be somewhat unique to kids with CVI. And then we're going to get into very much more specific modalities. So maybe the only last thing, Jen, is understanding conventional communication. Cool. And we'll cover tangible symbols next session.
Yep, and symbolism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
With 3 minutes to go.
All righty then. Yes, we're going to cover, which brings us to just the end of things. Yeah, our conventional symbols. So language is really just that. When we start using those initial abstract symbols, single words, single signs, because this is abstract. They don't look or feel like what they represent. And this is where we start getting maybe possible single icons on an AAC device. Again, single signs or single spoken words. And then when we move into more combined language, combined abstract symbols or language, this is where we're using 2 or more in conjunction. And again, it could be signs, it could be spoken words, it could be putting sentences together on a speech generating device. But this is where we really start getting into some more of the grammatical structure of language and not just instant, immediate single item requests. And our goal, as always, of course, is to work on helping our kids increase levels and functions. the amount of time that they're communicating, the number of things that they're communicating about, the number of routines where the communication is happening, the number of partners that they communicate, you know, all of those things. These were just your approaches to communication, and showing that there are many different approaches to, you know, modalities of communication. And so that, but that still doesn't mean that they don't need to still fit into one of the three areas, either pre-symbolic, emerging, or abstract, and might be modified in order for them to be able to fit that student's need at that level. And I think we're good. Yeah. Questions in 2 minutes.